Okay, after action report for the Battle of the Keystones Riftborne multiplayer server. This is the second multiplayer match, basically, for the game. This is going to be, from my point of view, for Nomad clans. I'm going to try and keep the format exactly the same as I usually do for my other after action reports. So we'll start with the big picture stuff and then work our way down to like the technical and the tactical level stuff. I have been putting this off for way too long because I've got so much other things going on IRL. So this after action report is going to be a little bit more messy than all my previous ones put together. But it is what it is. And besides, this game, that was a lot that happened. That was a lot more than what usually happens. That's for damn sure. So just for the benefit of my friends who have no idea what the hell this game is and are going to be watching it because they like my after action reports and me yapping all the time. Riftborne is an MMO RTS. It's very similar to like the browser-based MMO RTS games, which usually almost always pay to win. And yeah, we manage an empire. In this case, it's a sci-fi setting. So we manage fleets of starships. We build our economies. We can trade. We can do diplomacy. We can do all that kind of stuff. But in this game particularly, there is a set amount of time and there is an end game to it. Usually, the browser-based MMORTS, it usually just ends up being whoever cashes out the credit card first gets to dominate everybody until the end of the server life. Not in this one. In this one, game will run about somewhere between like a week or a month or so. There's only been 2 matches, but this is like the kind of gameplay loop that I've observed. It can last around about that time. So it's a little bit shorter than a Foxhole match, but it's the same concept. It's a persistent warfare game where when you log off, the game is still running in the background. And unlike in Foxhole, we get to automate a lot of stuff. You can automate your build orders, you can automate your cargo routes, you can automate raid routes as well. So when you launch attacks and all this and that. So like there's a lot of good quality stuff. The game respects the player's time, unlike Foxhole. And that was very apparent once I started playing, is that there's not going to be a point in time where, due to game mechanics, that you were just going to get shafted for no good reason other than the fact that the game mechanics were trash. That doesn't quite happen here. In Riftborne, it just comes down to you and your opponent, and just like any other kind of MMO persistent warfare game, the fundamental principle comes down to whoever can commit more time to the game will have a strategic advantage, and whoever has more players that are active that can commit more time to this game has a decisive strategic advantage. There is no way you're ever going to balance this out. There's so much talk for the last month that people have gotten into very heated debates all over the place. I'm trying to tune myself out of Discord because it's just all ridiculous at this point. But it doesn't matter like how you balance the ships or all the numbers or the graphs or all this and that. Like I said, basic fundamentals for a persistent online war game. That's an MMO. Because in this match here, we had up to 60 players, and as far as I know, I don't think there's a hard cap. I think this is just the way that the dev wants to stress test the game. I don't think 60 players is going to be like the hard cap. I'm pretty sure it can go way, way beyond that. So, yeah, going back on when I'm talking about the fundamental principles, it doesn't really matter, all these numbers and whatnot. If you've got more players that are more engaged on your side, you're going to have a massive strategic advantage. And there's no amount of balance fixing on my ship, my cruiser can, go faster but deals less damage towards this other guy who has a cheaper cruiser that can do what it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter once you get to the big picture stuff, which we are going to talk in depth for this one because a lot of things happened before the game even started that kind of determined the outcome of the game. And I'll see if I can break it all down. There's a lot of interesting things about this game that it shares in similarity to not just Foxhole or Hell Let Loose, in terms of like a MMO war game, which goes on for like long periods of time. But it shares a lot more in common with the more basic strategy games like Risk. There's a lot of similarities with this game, with Risk, and also to an extent War of Dots, which I covered extensively over the last 2 months on my channel. We will get back into that later as well. So we'll start at the top level stuff, the political, social level. So me and Red, okay, let me backtrack here. The way that the lobby system works is that you can have, at the time of this match at least, up to 4 players have a into a lobby, and a lobby is just basically like a pre-made match group. There were only 4 factions in the game, so that's the teams. So okay, and in each team you can have up to about, I think it was like 15 players or so per team per faction. So you could create a pre-made lobby of 4 players, and then what would happen is that you would be match made into either other lobbies as well within the same faction or with random solos. And then that's how the game would begin. So for this match here, it was me and Red Sun. And 4 days prior to the match beginning, and before we even made our own lobby, Red said that he wanted to take a senior leadership role of some kind. And I encourage this because I've known Vid for about 4 years or so. The first time I met Vid, when we played Foxhole, he wanted nothing to do with command and leadership. But over the last 4 years, he has progressively made like a lot of improvements and advancements in his ability to command and lead people. His English proficiency has improved by like 25-fold in the last 4 years, just because he's been forced to communicate in English, and he's had to deal with people, all over the world who. Because in MMO war games, that persistent warfare, it's usually a good idea to have, people in different time zones that can cover your bases when you're asleep. We'll get more into that later, because man, there was a lot of shit that happened on that side of the gameplay loop. But yeah, I encouraged him a lot to do it because this would be the first time that I've seen him take a senior leadership role where he answered to nobody except God himself. Throughout all the time that I've seen Red, he's always been a subordinate to somebody else. Most of the time, it was me, which I liked and enjoyed because Red is like an amazing officer to have in a gaming clan or guild. He's like, I don't know how to explain. He's one of those like selfless serving people. Like his ego can be sacrificed at a moment's notice. He can do this, and then he will just get the job done once somebody in the higher chain of command says that this is what needs to be done. I don't care how you do it, do it. He's done this not just for me, but he's also done it for other people that I've seen. So yeah, very rare kind of character. But this would be the first time that he would be alone at the top of the food chain. And to me, that was like seeing from how he progressed over the last 4 years. This was going to be the defining moment for him, from my point of view, at least. And I'm very proud of as to what he managed to accomplish in this specific game as well. So Red said he wanted a leadership role. I said, do it. I'll support you. I was willing to start a civil war if necessary, if we came down to that. But it didn't because, judging by how everyone else plays the game, no one was thinking on any of the same lines as me and Red were. So I've played a lot of Hell Let Loose competitively, and then a lot of Foxhole attempted competitively, and I've managed and created a lot of other gaming groups that in other games. There's War Thunder. There's also in real life I've used to before the coronavirus. Oh, there goes this video of being demonetized. Ah, hell, who's gonna watch it anyway? Um, yeah, I did a lot of miniature war game groups. I've been a part of all of that a lot. So I've done that quite a fair bit, but I've been trying to get other people that I've been playing with, more involved in that aspect of, gaming. But yeah, from my point of view of what I've seen and what I've read, the majority, oops, sorry, my bad. The majority of the Riftborne community as it is now, which is a very small community, is more of a player caliber that is like a paradox game, guys. The spreadsheet simulator folks. That's what I've seen and observed. Is that everyone's more concerned about numbers and the algorithms and mechanics of the combat and how the economies of the different cultures, how they interact with each other. I couldn't care less. I don't do the whole number thing whatsoever. I've always been more, when it comes to these kind of games, particularly, uh, always been more interested in strategy and the social political aspects of gaming groups. Because in my experience, that's always been the more important factor in persistent online warfare games. If you don't have the people engaged in the game, and if they're not gonna like slog it out with you for like who knows how long. In Foxhole games, campaigns can last weeks, months. as individual battle can last like up to 7 8 hours, and we're not just talking about how combat works in Riftborne, where you're just waiting for the raid or the attack to go out there 2 hours later, and then it resolves and it comes back. In foxhole battles, you have to be actively engaged with micro moving around shooting, and then you have to keep on communicating and coordinating with all the other players that are all in that battle and trying to achieve something. And that one's like really, really intensive. It's far more intensive than what happens in Riftborne in terms of the tactical level. Yeah, that's the kind of gameplay that I'm used to. So that's what I've always been more concerned about when you get into games like this. It's all the bigger picture stuff, which, like I said, most of the people who play the game don't seem to be interested in that aspect at all. And as we are going to see here, they paid for it by ignoring it. So Red wanted leadership role. I encouraged it. I was going to support him all the way, and I helped him, figure that shit out. Now comes to the part of communication. So I pushed very early on to Red that if you want to do this right, you need to set the Discord server up for whatever faction it is that we go in. Red didn't quite agree with that at the beginning, but that's because Red, like I said, hasn't like fully had to deal with the things that I've dealt with in the other games, which have much larger teams and much bigger drama and political games that need to be played. The Discord server in online gaming today is either you can see it as either being as important or more important than the in-game communication systems. What I mean by that is that the amount of power and influence that you can wield on a Discord server for any kind of community is absolutely ridiculous. I cannot explain how many times or give enough examples to illustrate this, other than the fact that it's very common to see people in gaming clans and guilds influence decision making processes through the Discord server without even having the game installed. This is a common thing that I have seen across many games. That is the kind of power that a Discord server, if you know what you're doing, can give you. Right? That's the kind of power that you can wield if you know how to play the politics and the social aspect of gaming. The Discord server was something that I pushed very heavily on, and Red finally did in the end make it. And I think we were probably one of the first factions to actually like make our faction Discord server and then like expand it greatly. We'll get more into detail into that, but yeah, you need that. You need the Discord server. It doesn't matter like what kind of game you're doing today. Now it's basically a necessity if you want to be competitive. That is, which is what we wanted to. We wanted to win. We like to win. So that happened there. Yeah, he set up the server. I encouraged it, and then what he wanted to do, which wasn't my idea, is that he wanted us to keep ourselves anonymous because no one knows who is part of the lobbies. At least that's the way as I understand it after the fact. Is that nobody actually knows who is who because you have in-game aliases. You're not tied down to a single in-game name that you create once you buy the game, and you're not tied down to your Discord server name either. So when you start playing the game, you can have your own separate alias inside and remain anonymous, which we'll get into a little bit more later. But that's what Red wanted to do. He didn't want because he wanted to play, the senior leadership role, and he knows a decent amount because he's observed me do these things as well. That's something that he played, which I think was actually a pretty good idea. We played ourselves like as if we didn't know each other when we were setting up all the Discord servers and whatnot. And even within the in-game faction chat, we just pretended like, oh, we don't know each other. And then every time he like put up an idea, which was an idea that we would have discussed on our DMs, hours before we even pitch it to the team, I'll just act like, oh yeah, it's a great idea. Whether or not it actually helped out or not, I don't know. But it's something that anybody else out there, if they want to play this game or any other kind of game like that's similar in mechanics to this, that is a play. That's a play you could do, especially when you're getting into as a new player into such a kind of game. That's something you can keep in your playbook for the future. So had that going. I insisted on a meme channel to be created from the get go. Me personally, usually the reason I do that is more to like create community. within whatever it is we're doing. I didn't know how well it was going to work for this because it was going to be a short term kind of thing, right? This match, it was only going to last like a couple of weeks at most. And whether or not it was going to be like really important or really helpful, I didn't know. But that's something that I usually do for the other gaming groups that I'm a part of. So I insisted on that. And I think it worked out fine because we had meme superiority from the get go. I don't think anybody else, I've yet to see a meme from anybody else, from any of the other factions from this multiplayer match. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm quite happy with that. The way you want to think about it is that the meme channel is sort of like the monument in Civ 5. It's the first culture building that you build. And from the get go, it doesn't really do that much. But later on, as the game progresses, if you use it more often, it has a compounding effect that pays off later on. That's usually the way that I think of it. And yeah, so there's that, my little contribution to the Discord server. So, in terms of the internal politics, right? So, we're going to have to do some 2020 hindsight here. We didn't know at the time that we had a 4 stack in our faction of veterans from the first multiplayer match. So, this is Classy Mushroom, aka Vesper, Johnny, Belly, and UX, aka Antares. These 4 guys were vets from the first multiplayer match, and they were in a lobby that happened to be match made into our faction, the Nomad clans. We didn't know this until after the game was over. So we had those guys, and then what we also didn't know was that we had a guy called Asgareth, who is a Starborn player. That's a game that I've heard of many years ago, and it dropped off my radar a bit. It is very similar to this game in terms of like the genre and the mechanics a little bit. But he's a veteran from that game, and he brought in a bunch of vets from that game over here because apparently Starborn was a dying game or something like that. Um, so he was no stranger to this kind of persistent online warfare game, where when you log off, the game still doesn't stop. So from the get go, when we analyzed our team composition, we had 2 Foxhole veterans whose concept of burning out, in terms of gameplay wise, far exceeds than whatever Riftborne can offer. We have 4 vets from the first multiplayer match who, they know the mechanics and they understand how to play throughout the end game for this specific game. And we had Asgareth, who is a veteran from another game that was similar to that. He was in on us. So once we get to like the end game topics, you can see that we had the vast majority of veteran players that kind of knew how long and yeah, how much effort it was going to take from the get-go. We didn't quite see that from 2 of the other factions. Actually, no, all the factions really, because yeah, okay, we'll get into that later on. But that's something I need to mention now from the get-go that I found out just a few days ago, as of the time of the recording of this after action report. So there goes that. Um, Okay, in terms of team chemistry, yeah, it worked out great. We had no internal political battles. Like I said just now, I was willing to fight a civil war. That's not me larping. That's me being cynical as fuck because the amount of shit I've seen in all the other games that I've played and the games where the teams are much larger than this, drama is basically the default of what happens in games like these. And I only really want to win. That's my only concern. And in order to win, you do need to have your own house in order. So as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to trust anybody else except Red to run it properly. Just because in my previous experience, if it's not someone I know or myself running it, it's probably going to get screwed up big time on some level. So yeah, that was the reasoning behind why I was backing Red up the way I was. And yeah, it worked out fine. No one actually really challenged this. And knowing what we know now, because we didn't know it at the time, within Classy's 4-man stack, they didn't have any kind of like hidden, at least from what they told me after the game was finished, they didn't have like a separate hierarchy that was going on behind the background, which is important because we're gonna get to the one piece of drama that did happen in our faction in a little bit here. They didn't have a separate hierarchy or conspiracy going on behind which means that Red, credit to him, was able to get this coalition of players together and lead them and um, give focus and direction throughout the first 7 days of the multiplayer match, which were the most decisive, really, because within the first 7 days, after the seventh day, once Stellar Fedits surrendered, the game was basically over at that point. So credit to Vid to actually, for the first time in such a kind of leadership position, which he hadn't done before, he did really well. That was really good, and especially once we compare to the other factions that played the game, what they did or what they didn't do. uh, yeah, I'm very proud. I'm very proud of how far Red has come. There's about two other guys from my gaming group that we've played a lot of other games, which I'm very proud of because they've made similar advancements in their leadership capabilities. Yeah, that was great. So we are now going to go on to the minute details within the faction in terms of coordinating. So we're gonna get into technical stuff. I wasn't happy with what we were doing. I'll put up a screenshot of how our Discord server was set up, but it wasn't what I was used to. I'm used to far more efficient and organized gameplay. But once we figured out after the game was over what everyone else did, it suddenly dawned on me that what little coordination or the kind of coordination that we had was far superior to what everyone else had. It comes back down to like an economist's favorite question, which is compared to what? Compared to what I'm used to, I wasn't happy at all with our faction coordination. But compared to the game we were playing, the reality of the situation, we basically look like the U.S. military in terms of our command and control and our coordination. We had constant comms and planning throughout the entire match up until the final battle. We had the Veil players handle the recon, the intelligence, and the general, screening of all the fleets. Basically, the Veil players, they took it upon themselves to knock out enemy spies, enemy spy fleets, gather all the intelligence that we needed, and then relay all that into the Discord server, of which we had a separate channel for the intelligence. And if one of our other players, the Astrum players, wanted an intel on a specific target, then the Veil player would go out and get the intel and then bring it back for them. And this was like a constant cycle that occurred where depending on who was online, and oh yeah, that's another thing we need to bring up. We had a decent spread in terms of time zones for our players. I think the only one lacking was my time zone, where there were periods of about 4 to 5 hours where I was online and nobody else was online. And it was a little bit difficult for me to do things because there were usually at least two other players on all the other factions that were online when I was online and I was trying to do offensive plays, which made it a little bit difficult to actually get anything going. But yeah, that's part and parcel for games like these. But for when the majority of our faction was online, yeah, it was like a constant cycle of everyone communicating with each other and then just playing out the game the way that they saw fit. Red didn't do any micromanaging or kind of like, exerting dictatorship powers, which I've seen in other groups where leaders, they get into their head that they must be the ones that must make the final decision on everything. I've always disagreed on that kind of leadership style. Usually for me, it's more important to just get everybody together, give them a focused direction onto what it is as a team we want to achieve, and then let them figure it out. And that's basically what Red did for most of the time. He did try to get more organized efforts on like large scale things, like plan a campaign. But what I found out is that it's not that practical. In Foxhole, it's more practical because when you want to try and execute operation, the amount of time that it takes to actually get all the logistics in place and the amount of like manpower required to do it, it does require you to plan it out with some kind of timetable schedule to execute it. But in Riftborne, it's not really that important because we don't have that many players. We only have like, at most for a single major action, half a dozen players online at any one time. And like I said, most of the minute details are all automated within the game. We don't need to manually move one piece of cargo at a time and have a player do that nonstop for like 5 hours. Yeah, that was the part that we had to change in terms of our thinking which we did eventually towards the end of the match. Um, yeah, but yeah, that's something that we had going on. We had all the intelligence gathering done by a few set of players, and then all the attacking and coordination of the fleets that just occurred naturally. We had separate channels for offense, for defense, and then resource allocation because the Veil players during the opening campaigns, once they had conducted raids and gotten loot, they would feed our Astrian players, particularly Antares, because he was the guy that was trying to rush a reactor. So we fed him. And yeah, it was understood between all the players that this was the kind of general thing that we want to do. Antares came out and said that he was going to go rush a reactor. The Veil players then took it upon themselves, okay, we're going to scale our eco with the raid loot, but anything extra we'll feed it to this guy so that later on, once Antares gets the reactor online, he can then help boost the rest of our ecos. And yeah, that was just like a thing that happened on the fly. Everyone kind of sort of agreed. There was no like big master plan that Red came up with that. It was just the experience from the players that we had online just came up with that and then did that. Yeah, for the more detailed stuff regarding the actual campaigns and the battles, we'll get to that later on. Right. So that's covered that. Okay, right. So I want to talk about the strategy part of Riftborne. Like I said, there's a lot of similarities that this game has with Risk or any other kind of free for all strategy game, and it was completely neglected by everybody else. So usually in Risk, when one player starts to get an advantage, so long as the troop count that the lead player has does not exceed the combined total of all the other players left in the game, he's not quite in a winning position just yet. This is because of the concept of the balance of power. And if you want to learn more about this, there's the Risk Pro gamer. I think his name is Pete. His YouTube channel is the Kill Pete Strategy. He talks about it at length many times, all over the place. But yeah, that's the basic gist of it, the balance of power. So long as the other players in the free for all game, their troop counts are still larger than the single lead player troop counts, the game is still very much in play. He does not have a decisive strategic advantage yet. If he gets more troops than everyone else combined, then y'all are toast. The same concept is apparent here in Riftborne. Um, and yeah, like I said, everyone else just didn't care at all about balance of power. We managed to win partly because there's a lot of factors here. Hopefully, by now, it's a little bit apparent that in terms of the internal politics and social structure of our faction, we were far superior. We were in a far superior position to everybody else. I only know this because we've had the reports from both the TU and the SF players. These are the two other major factions that we did most of the fighting. ED, Eclipse Dominion, they basically were a non-starter. From the get-go, they had the least amount of activity in terms of players when they were logging in for the first 24 hours, and then they were the first to kind of like fold because they sort of like just stopped playing the game. Stopped playing game except for two of the players who I've been informed were veterans from the first multiplayer match. But when you're a part of a team of that's supposed to be like 15 players and only two of you guys are online, there's not much you could do out of that. So yeah, but from the Terran Union, the TU, and the Stellar Feds SF, both factions, there were multiple players from each faction after the game was over. They posted their side of the story. And what's very apparent from just reading all the different reports that they posted is that internally they were not coherent as a faction. Of course, once again, compared to Nomad Clan, they were incoherent. They had attempts, they had their own Discord servers, and there were comms between players throughout the match, but they were nowhere near the level that we were executing on. Even on the political level, where Red would always keep us informed as to what was going on externally in terms of the politics. He wouldn't tell us exactly like all the details, which was once again a very good job to Red. When you're the leader, you want to try and shield the rest of your players from the external political stuff as much as possible. Usually for me, what I would do is that I try and get the officers in on it, so that way if pressure on the political games they start to mount up a little bit, you can offload just a little bit to the rest of you guys. Because if not, you're gonna burn out really fast, which funnily enough happened here in this game for Red. Um, but yeah, he did an excellent job in shielding the rest of the faction away from that, and he handled it all on his own. And like I said, first 7 days were the most important. He handled it great, perfectly, and gave us a winning position. Well, helped us give part of the winning position. Once again, it's a factor. There were multiple factors that resulted in our victory here. So yeah, nobody else wanted to play the balance of power. Both TU and SF, they had leaders. They were engaged in diplomacy. I'll put the transcripts up on the screen here so that people can see the things that occurred between Red and all the other faction leaders. But what became apparent was after reading all the other reports that everyone else posted, a lot of people just did not know what the hell was going on. In fact, there was somebody out there in the Discord server who posted that from his point of view, when they started playing the game, it looked like they were just going to play as individuals, like as if you were playing the single player mode. But it just so happens that your neighbors were on the same team as you. And there was this very loose understanding that we are part of a faction and the leader can make the stances as to dictating who we can invade and who we can attack. And that was basically it from like the very beginning. And the only reason why their faction came together during the middle of the game was the fact that we were coming in and knocking on their door. So that that gave some insight that I didn't quite know was happening, because I always would assume the worst case scenario, that everyone else was going to be on a similar war footing to us, and that everybody else wanted to try and win, to some extent. So therefore, they would take what I would consider to be like, the meta decisions. These are the most efficient ways to get things done in a persistent online warfare game. But that was not the case at all. That was not quite the case at all. People had to be instigated into doing this part of the game, the politicking and the communication and the coordination. So that was eye opening for me. Um, and yeah, the rest of the other factions, most of the time they didn't know what was going on. Um, there was a case where someone made a comment where they had no idea there was diplomacy going on. And that wasn't just one player in one faction. It was like a couple players from each faction as well. They had no idea that things were going on. What was interesting to me was that once we got to the later stages of the match, we as the Nomad clan seemed to actually have a better understanding of what was going on in the other factions, despite not actually communicating with them directly. I think that credit has to go to our lead Veil players, Classy, Byron, and Asgareth. The Recon Intelligence that they did, we were able to figure out who had fleets where, how they were stationed, and the constant use of the Recon and Intel. We could tell the way that they were moving the fleets around. It wasn't due to any kind of like real grand strategic micromanagement campaign that they had going on. It's more very reactive. And every time we tested with our raids and attacks, we could see they were always just being reactive to what we were doing. So, with the exception of TU and SF getting all their fleets concentrated over their reactors to defend the reactors, outside of that kind of coordination, we managed to figure out that they're not quite as capable as we are in terms of maneuver and coordination. And then we pressed that advantage throughout the later stages of the campaign. Yeah, that was interesting. If everyone else had actually played the game on the strategic principles of Risk and War of Dots, um, they could have easily have stopped this, because from the very start, I was against our entire plan of attack. From my point of view, I was convinced that both Farron and Classy were more interested in trying to get their own, how do I say? Both of them understood as Veil players that they needed to start raiding very quickly. And therefore, once you start raiding, then you can generate the shards, which then gives the Veil players massive bonuses. And then these bonuses will end up, accumulating and having a compound effect as the game progresses. So from my point of view, it looked to me that they were more interested in trying to get the mechanics of their faction, of their culture, in play, so that they could do more things. So But at the beginning, I was thinking that these guys are very selfish, that they were just trying to, because they were in a good position. Farron was in an excellent position from the get go because of I don't know if it was a glitch, but it was discussed that the dev might have taken Farron's start position and put him normally in the in our quadrant because he was spawned in the middle of the TU faction. Um, and yeah, there was discussion between him and the dev to sort that out, but it never did get sorted out. Everyone just played the position as it was. Um, but yeah, and from my point of view from the start, that what it looked like to me is that they were more interested in just trying to get their numbers and their graphs going up, and then the team play came secondary to them. That was my point of view from the start of the campaign. And my big concern was, as I said, balance of power. Usually, when you play higher level Risk or War of Dots gameplay, if everyone is trying to win, because it's a free for all situation where you have multiple players trying to fulfill a single win condition, once other players realize that a single player is getting an advantage, they will always gang up on him to prevent the lead player from getting a decisive strategic advantage. In the previous example, as I said, when a player gets more troops than all the other players combined, that's when you're in trouble. When you need to prevent that from happening. But it didn't happen. That did not happen at all throughout the entire game. Nobody was interested in playing that aspect of the game, and it was all to their detriment. But yeah, only reason why I'm bringing this up is that I don't think moving on into later games that this is going to be a good idea to do. Hopefully, everyone's going to be a little bit wiser as to how the game's going to progress. Yeah, because we were painting a big target on our back. Once we hit TU and then we pivoted to SF, we were swinging at everybody and everything. And yeah, I was fully expecting a response from all the other factions to come gunning for us. Like I said, it didn't happen because everyone else as a faction compared to us was very incoherent, not cohesive. And yeah, a lot of people were just not interested in doing diplomacy at all. That was another common thing that I read throughout all the reports is that there were so many people that were talking to each other, but there was no actual diplomacy and no actual decision making happening. And this also played more into our advantage because the way the game mechanics are designed, the faction leader has the ability to set the stances. And once a faction stance is set, that basically determines whether or not a player can or cannot raid or attack other people, which is pretty big. There's pros and cons to this system. Pros are obviously that this helps faction leaders keep everyone in the faction in check so that we don't get rogue renegades going around just blasting people and upsetting the diplomatic, situation if there is one. But then the cons that occur, right? And it wasn't Red's intention to play this out because we did not know until the end of the game just what exactly was happening with everybody else. But it played into Red's advantage because he was doing diplomacy with the faction leaders for all three. And like I said, faction leaders, the internal politics and communication was very lacking. Some players didn't even know what there was happening. It played well into our hands because that way, if we're just dealing with the faction leaders and these are the guys that set the stances, if we can bullshit our way for these guys and then we con them into a bad situation or a situation that favors us, we get even more of an advantage, which I think is what happened a couple of times because Red wanted to try Diplo a couple of times, but then what I would call the Nomad faction's war party, uh, they said, "No, we are already too far committed into this play of trying to snowball our ecos, so we're just gonna keep going and keep swinging and then see what happens." So there were a couple of times I think where Red was in open negotiations for a ceasefire or some kind of diplomatic agreement, and a few hours later we just went in and slapped them. And because, like I said, the stances can only be set by the faction leader. If you hit them when the faction leader is offline, there's going to be a period of time where they can't retaliate. So we got a couple of battles where we just got free swings into people, and then they couldn't actually retaliate against us. That was that's hilarious. Um, it's obviously bad because I was very unhappy when it was happening because, as I said, if everyone's actually trying to win the game, diplomatically we shot ourselves in the foot a million times. Because if everyone realizes that you're this kind of guy that's just gonna lie, bullshit, and then backstab, that has consequences. At least, in competitive environments, like if you're in a high level Risk or War of Dots game, there's no direct communication, but people can tell. It's like, oh yeah, this guy, he wants everything for himself. It's only me, and nothing for you. Therefore, I need to be a little bit careful next time there's like a non-aggression pact along the border here. Yeah, these are the kind of political calculations that occur. But we paid zero political consequences for backstabbing people on the diplomatic stage, just because they were incoherent as a faction, and yeah, that basically came down to it. Wouldn't recommend in the future that we would do that, because if everyone, like I said, if everyone is actually going to be trying to play the game to win, and then they have to be engaged in diplomacy to some extent if they really want to do that. Yeah, try not to do that, because in the long run, it's not gonna pay off. It's not gonna pay off. You'll be just putting a target on your back for not only that game but for games afterwards. So yeah, right. So let's try against TU. Yeah, keeping the cohesiveness of the faction. Okay, so that was the last part here where Red burned out. He didn't burn out the game because he kept playing the game, but he burned out from the leadership position after the 7th day, which, funnily enough, after he resigned the leadership position, Stellar Feds surrendered the game. In terms of the strategic position that we were discussing within our faction when we started the war against SF, um, we were not quite happy with the position because we understood that we were in a two-front war, and there was a good chance that if ED wanted to actually win the game, they'd come in on the side of SF or TU and then swing at us. Granted, they were on the other side of the map, but you know, in the long run, even if it takes like 4 hours for a raid to get from one end of the map to the other, some pressure is better than no pressure. And yeah, if they had been able to coordinate a little bit better or had more active players, ED could have very easily have shifted the balance of power, and the outcome of the game could have been very different. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Damn, I'm not sure if I want to talk about this one. Um, you know what? I will. So every time Red tried to make a plan or say something within the Discord as to this is the kind of pivot that we're going for, Lassie would always be the one that would, after either immediately or a couple of hours later, say something that was contrary to whatever it is that Red was trying to plan and execute. And I thought Classy was just being autistic or an asshole. But knowing what I know now from how the game progressed, I think Classy was just oblivious to what was happening. And I don't blame him, because even within my own gaming group, I have to explain things to people as to how, when you're playing in as a team on a long-term persistent warfare game, these are things you need to keep in mind. If you have a leader out there and he's trying to do something, don't try to directly confront or contest what it is he's doing, because he's got other shit that he needs to deal with. And in this case here, Red was dealing with the diplomacy externally and internally. Once again, I need to remind you, the viewer, that we didn't know that everyone else was incoherent. We all thought that they were all playing the game to win, and they were on same page as we were. They were having coordination on their own Discord servers and whatnot, but that wasn't the case. But from our point of view, especially from Red's point of view, that's how we were treating the situation. Don't underestimate your opponents. So to him, it was actually very mentally taxing, trying to talk to all the other faction leaders and then handle the internal politics that was going on with our faction, and then plan strategic campaigns as to how we're going to swing here, swing there, how to get everyone together, stay cohesive as a faction. That all piles up. And Red is in a precarious IRL situation. He's Ukrainian, and he lives in Kiev, so he's actually getting bombed in real life as the whole game is being executed. Funnily enough, just before he crashed out, there was a massive air campaign that the Russians uh, started, brand new air campaign that was pretty bad. Yeah, it was pretty bad. So that was all happening for Red, and yeah, it didn't help that Classy was doing the things that Classy does, and that one I've seen now is that he's not autistic, and he's not actually trying to be a dick or anything like that. It's just how he is. He's just a little bit oblivious as to how everyone else is interpreting and how he uses his words the way he does. The main reason why I say that now is because Classy takes over command of the faction after the seventh day and after Stellar Fed's surrenders. And usually, what happens when that happens in an MMO game like this is that the power goes to the head of the new leader, his ego takes over, and then he starts enacting like big changes, and then starts like switching things up within the faction. Classy did none of that. It was the first time I think I've seen in probably 6 years where I've seen someone take over a leadership position and just basically leave the faction as it is. All he did was just provide, as Red did, direction as to when we're going to pivot to the next phase of our offensive. And yeah, that's basically the timing and keep everyone together, cohesive within the faction and engaged. Yeah, that's what Classy did. So that's what points to me to say that there was no ulterior motive behind Classy or him being a dick or autistic. That's just the way he is, and props up to Classy for doing that. Like I said, probably the first time in 6 years that I've seen a change in leadership of a group where the guy didn't, go crazy with power. So that was that. Um, all I can say is that part of the crash out is my responsibility because it should have been I should have told Red, given him advice as to what to do in such a situation. Because funny enough, I've been in this exact situation many times over the last 10 years or so. Um, and it never occurred to me to actually inform him as to a strategy to deal with this. um I think it was because I was too busy trying to figure out the mechanics of the game because I hadn't even played the game until we started the multiplayer match. I was too busy trying to figure out all the numbers and what they all meant and whatnot. I still don't understand what all the numbers mean, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, when you have someone that's like openly either challenging or contradicting you or doing something that's upsetting your flow as the leader and trying to keep the group cohesive and trying to keep them focused on the single direction. My go-to strat, and it works out about 99 out of 100 times, is that you just take the guy that's causing you trouble and then you just talk to him in private and then get it over and done with as possible. You just be as frank as possible with the guy in the DM. Say what your concerns and what problems are and why you think that he's in the wrong, whatnot, and then you just solve it there and then. And like I said, 99% of the time, it resolves on its own because usually in this case here, I don't think Classy had an ulterior motive or was being like on purpose, being a dick or anything. It was just a little bit oblivious to the social cues. Yeah, I think it would have been fine, and I'm pretty sure Classy and Rick could have like worked things out there and then, but that didn't happen. Um, yeah, I've done that many times. It usually works things out. I should have told Red once I saw trouble brewing up, and yeah, I would take some responsibility for that. Um, What else did I want to say about that? Oh yeah, in the one case out of 100 where that doesn't work out, I'll talk about that in another video because I've been in that situation a couple times myself, and things get really messy, like really messy. Yeah, but we'll leave that for another day. So that was the only big drama that happened within the Nomad faction, and like I said, because of how well we played as a team from the get-go, it didn't matter that our leader crashed out, and yeah, we had Classy take over, and yeah, there was no real political upheaval, no civil war, none of that. We kept on the course, and then we kicked everybody's ass. So that was that. Right. So talked about, yeah, I think that's like all the big stuff. So we'll go on to the technical things. So from the opening get-go, as I mentioned earlier, Fiven and Classy, they wanted an aggressive opening strategy to try to get a snowball effect for the eco. I was against this from the get-go because politically it was going to paint a big target on our back. But yeah, that's what happened. So the first campaign against Terran Union, Fiven, his main base was in the middle of the faction, and he ran circles around everybody. I don't know how he did it, to be honest. Um, but yeah, he 1V'd everybody for a period of time there. And Terran Union was incapable of actually mounting a successful counterattack against Ferrin. And Vesper Classy Mushroom, he was the second closest guy to the Terran Union faction. And because he's a vet from the previous games as well, he managed to jump in on that action very early on after like the first 12 hours or so. And both of them then ran circles around the entire Terran Union faction. And that basically stalled their eco for the entirety of the game, really. There was a concern after Stellar Feds surrendered that Terran Union were going to outscale, well, not outscale us in eco, but they were catching up back to where they were previously. And that was giving us a little bit of a concern. But then once we pivoted out from SF after they surrendered, we then realized that they didn't actually have anything. But yeah, credit due, where credit is due. Fiven went in, ran circles around the entire faction, and yeah, 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 well done. Well done, Finn. And that's not the only play he did. There's something else that happens in the last campaign. So once we looted the crap out of Terran Union, we had to pivot to SF. I think it was understood amongst some of the other veteran players here because, like I said, me and Red, this was our first match. We didn't quite know who all the vets were, but knowing what we know now, Stellar Feds had probably an equal amount of active players that knew how to play this type of game, and that made them a big threat to us. So we pivoted into them, and then we attacked, and then we realized that they had not built any ships whatsoever. So we pivoted into them, we slammed into them. I think it was a combination of the fact that they didn't have good command and control within the faction. Red was bullshitting them on the Diplo front, and yeah, they really thought that they could just eco greed themselves into a end game position before we pivoted to them, but that didn't happen. We slammed at them really hard for the first offensive. That was the one and only real proper strike that the Nomad clan as a faction together managed to execute. I think we got like 8 players all online at the same time to launch the first initial strike onto SF. And the way we do that is that we use a lot of chaff raids. So the slowest moving ship in the fleet, we bring a couple of extra of them along and then send them out to other targets to try and decoy enemy defenses. But it didn't matter in the end because they weren't prepared. They didn't have anything. So that's what happened there. Yeah, we got 8 players all coordinated, launch a first strike all in one go. We tried our best to time all of the strikes to occur at the same time. We got it to around about an hour window for all the major strikes. Yeah, that was great, but that was the only time where we got that many players within our faction to that level of coordination. And after that, it was just more freestyle, free flow coordination of minor offensives here and there. So we went in, we slammed the SF, and things weren't going too well because we realized that they managed to get a reactor, and they got it about 8 hours after our own reactor. So we were only ahead by like 8 hours in terms of eco. At least that's the way I was seeing the calculations being done. I probably am wrong about that. You probably need to ask Classy or one of the other vets in our faction as to what the actual position ended up being like, because we were still, fog of war was going on a little bit there. But Stellar Feds surrendered, and we never quite understood why until after the game was over. Basically, it was the lead players. I think it was High Score and Meta, or maybe somebody else. I don't know. They were not happy with the fact that they were getting raided all the way up to the 3 a.m. and they just burned out at that point. So they called it quits there. They surrendered. Some of their other faction members were a little bit upset about that because they were playing the game and they thought that they could still get something out of it. Which from our point of view at that point in time, it looked like they could have done something. Like I said, if they had actually played the game where they had Diplo with all the other factions, especially with TU at least, there's no reason why they couldn't have ganged up on us, which was my big fear from the get go. But they didn't. They didn't engage in that part of the game. And once they realized that they were getting raided all the way into 3 a.m., the top players at least, uh, yeah, they surrendered. And that was basically the game. The game basically ended once Stellar Fed surrendered because that was the last chance that they had enough power in terms of eco and troops. Like I said, balance of power from risk principles. That was the last point where they could have potentially have gotten either TU or ED to group up and gang up, but it wasn't in the cards for any of them. So that was the it. Now for the final campaign, basically was a turkey shoot. We pivoted back to TU because they had gotten their reactor up, and I think they were going for a second reactor. And once we pivoted to them and started striking, everyone wanted revenge on Firin. So they all tried to coordinate a massive strike on Firin. And the thing was is that Firin was asleep at the time when the war started again. And we have the battle logs from that battle. They threw everything they could at him, and he just stood there and just shrugged it all off. That was crazy. And Asgareth, at this point in time, he had a fleet that was so large that he could solo the entire Terran Union Navy all by himself. So yeah, we had 3 players at the end game there, which could solo the entire TU Navy all by themselves. We had Asgareth, we had Firin, and I think Classy. Classy also could have done it, but Classy would have taken like a lot of losses if he did try to do it. But yeah, the game was basically over once SF surrendered. So they tried to knock out Firin. He just stood there like Stonewall. And then Asgareth went in on the reactor and then wiped out about half their fleet. And it was basically over at that point. Yeah, so that's the all the minor tactical and operational stuff for the Battle of the Keystones at the action report. Just to recap then, our strategic advantage of good comms, being a unified faction, and then combine that with the lack of any real opposition from our opponents who never fully organized themselves to our level. It made the initial opening aggressive strategy, which I disagreed with, uh, it was a game winner, basically. There was nothing that anybody was going to be able to do after that, considering what we know now of how they were playing the game. If they weren't going to engage with communication or politics or any of that, that's just how the cookie crumbles. Yeah, we played the basics of keeping our own house in order. Those were all principles that I thought read from all the other games that we've played before. You gotta keep your own internal friction and have good leadership within your own faction before you can properly start executing external plays like offensive campaigns and this, that, and the other. If you don't have your own house in order, it's very difficult to do all that other stuff. Yeah, point here that I did put up. Our strategy that we played in this game, it wouldn't work if everyone else was on the same page as us. If everyone else had coherent faction politics and cohesiveness, and also played the Diplo game, then we probably would have lost. That is, yeah, that's my analysis on that. I did put a minor point here that even if one of our opponents was a little bit more focused, they probably could have gotten something out of it. Yeah. Okay, yeah, here was the last thing that I wanted to talk about is that there's still, like I said at the very beginning of the report, there's a lot of talk about balancing issues regarding the ship stats and the faction, I mean, the culture bonuses and whatnot. As far as I'm concerned, the big thing that we need to sort out is the lobby system because we're trying to play the game uh, and it's like a spreadsheet simulator, like Stellaris, like that, which is not. It's an MMO. It's more akin to. It's got more in similarity to like World of Warcraft. Um, I think our main concern should be to figure out how to get the lobby system reworked. And I think that just like any other MMO, there shouldn't be restrictions as to who the players can interact with. Like in Foxhole, at least, we have regiments and coalitions that number in the hundreds and thousands of players. Um, that should be something that we shouldn't be limited to. There shouldn't be a hard cap. We probably just let the players organize themselves, create their own communities, and then as they build themselves up, then we get bigger teams on all the different factions, and that will eventually level out the playing field and make the game a little bit more competitive. That's my point of view on that because that's what I've seen in other games how it works out most of the time. It's the engagement. The players need to be engaged till the very end. We still got a lot of AFK players in this match, and I talked to the veterans from the previous multiplayer match. Apparently, in that match, the first multiplayer match, the AFK rate was even worse than what happened here. Um, and no amount of balancing issues is gonna fix that one. That one can only really be solved by player engagement and community, which is why I said Just let the players create their own factions, probably get as many dudes as possible, get everyone engaged, let them create their own subcultures and sub communities, and then have them compete with all the other players, and then see what happens from there. So yeah, that will conclude my after action report for the Battle of the Keystones.